Joining us right now on here, Sports Bash Saturday on 97.3 ESPN, Kevin McCormick, Sixers beat writer over at 97.3 ESPN.com. Also Sports Illustrated at Kevin MCC NBA on Twitter. Kevin, how you doing this Saturday?
Josh, I'm doing all right, and I, like the rest of the people, am grateful that you came to work today.
I mean, there might be a list, like it might be a delineation of who's more or less happy, but it's still, I appreciate that. So, Kevin, I opened the show talking about this, and that is, I know that some of the comments that Scottie Pippen said in that GQ article have been controversial, right? And I've thoroughly prefaced by saying I think he might have been under some sort of influence because he's promoting that bourbon line. And every picture he takes now, he's got a glass of bourbon in his hand. So he might be perpetually drunk at this point. But you know what? What he said about Simmons is 100% correct. When he said that Ben Simmons is afraid of being humiliated, he's afraid of failure, and Giannis is not. I think we saw last night a perfect example of that. Giannis missed three threes, 0 for 3. But he still finished with 25 points. He still drove down the lane like he's unafraid of anybody, and the Bucks won. And you got to wonder, you know what? Giannis and Ben Simmons, they may have similar physical abilities, but they're completely different human beings, come from completely different backgrounds. And you know what? You saw last night why Giannis was an MVP and why Ben Simmons is the most hated man in Philadelphia.
I feel like part of it plays in the, nature versus nurture kind of debate. Obviously, like you said, they come from two completely different backgrounds. When you look at Giannis, this guy has scratched and clawed for everything. His life story, for those that don't know what his life was before basketball, definitely check it out. It's crazy what he went through back in Greece, making his way to the NBA. And it shows that he has that hardworking determination. He doesn't take anything from anyone, and he's fearless. I mean, he's come this far and overcome all these odds. You think he's going to be scared about shooting a couple threes in the game? Like you said, he's not scared of being humiliated. He got here against all odds and is a multi-time MVP. Meanwhile, Ben Simmons, he was paid for this fame and this stardom and was highly touted from the beginning and was on the cover of Slam magazine and had the next LeBron tag and such. So I do believe that there's a lot of truth there of why Ben Simmons never really bounced back from that reluctance to shoot throughout his career is because he doesn't want to fail. He sticks to what works and what has got him here so far. Meanwhile, Giannis, it comes from the background of what you came from, and I think they're shaped mentally probably complete opposite ends of the spectrum, to be honest.
Absolutely. And a side effect to that is, and I said this multiple times this week, Kevin, listen, I understand people are mad at Ben Simmons, but I'm honestly worried about his mental health. I really genuinely think that Ben Simmons, I don't know if he needs to see a therapist, a counselor, a pastor, if he needs a Bible, I don't know what it is. But Ben Simmons needs genuine help. And I'm not sure if he's ever going to get better as long as he's in a Sixers uniform. I think he needs to go somewhere else. He needs a fresh start. And I think the Sixers would be better off without him at this point.
I don't know if they'd be better off without him. I completely tiptoe the side of the debate. I really see both sides, and I agree. There's something really going on with him between the ears. And I believe it was last year Jackie McMullen put out an article that he did start to see a sports psychologist. So if that's something he still continued to do or maybe stopped, maybe it's something he should reconsider. Obviously, there was rumblings of family troubles going on behind the scenes, so I can't even imagine having to deal with something like that in the public eye, being on a team like the Sixers who were, almost crowned a championship contender from the beginning of the season. So there is a lot going on, both on the court for him and off the court. So I agree. There some added help outside of that, I think, is, great for anyone, and even more so someone who has to live in the public eye where everything they do is, around the bright lights of the paparazzi and stuff. But being better off without him is something I don't know if I could fully get behind, even with his shortcomings. Ben Simmons is still a phenomenal player, elite playmaker, high IQ, arguably the top defender in the league, easily the most versatile. I still say he should have been Defensive Player of the Year this season. So even with the negatives that come with him, I think it's still tough to say that the Sixers would be better off without him.
Okay, well, we can agree to disagree. I just feel like at this point in time, everyone needs to move on. And you know what? I understand that There was, as Woj reported, there was no formal trade request placed. But listen, I'm a little older than you, Kevin, and I'll tell you right now, I've never heard of a situation in my lifetime where people talk about moving on potentially if they're not prepared to move on from each other. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have a conversation with someone who's going to be your ex, for example, or a married couple doesn't go to marriage counseling or divorce counseling if they're not already thinking about life without each other. So as far as I'm concerned, when the Sixers and Rich Paul met this week, that was Daryl Morey and people saying, we didn't draft Ben Simmons. Does your client want to be here? If he wants to be here, let's talk and discuss things. But you don't have that conversation, you're not already thinking about it.
Well, I mean, it's a conversation that's probably already been had at this point. We know that Ben Simmons was reportedly on the table for James Harden. So these rumblings started back in, January, around when the Harden trade happened. I forget when
December.
exactly happened. But, yeah, December. So, I mean, it was already like the inkling was there very early on. And after everything that's happened, in terms of needing a change of scenery, I think that could be a real possibility. But I could also see Ben Simmons still wanting to be in a successful situation. So I think it's going to be one of those tricky things where, he has the most powerful agent in the NBA. If at the end of the day, if he wants something done, something's going to get done. Rich Paul has shown time and time again that when one of their guys wants to get not only out of one place, but to another, he's going to make it happen. But I agree. If they're going out there and they're having these talks, if everything was fine and dandy, Rich Paul wouldn't have to go to Chicago and talk with Daryl Morey and Elton Brand. So Daryl kind of said it in his end of the season press conference that they're committed to this big three right now, but they're going to weigh all options and, look at every possible angle of revamping this team. So with a guy like Daryl running the show and them having talks like that, it does feel like when you read the tea leaves that everything is still completely on the table.
Kevin McCormick joining us here on Sports Bash Saturday on 97.3 ESPN at Kevin MCC NBA on Twitter for all your Sixers and NBA coverage. Check out his work over at 97.3 ESPN.com and over at Sports Illustrated. Kevin, this offseason also is going to be an opportunity for Daryl Morey to really make his imprint on the team because last year was a shortened offseason. It was basically a month or two for a lot of teams between the end and the beginning. And we know Daryl Morey is not complacent. This man has never sat on his hands in his life. The dude always finds a move to make. I mean, I remember when he took over the Rockets, like the full control of the Rockets, and he saw the end of the McGrady and Yao Ming era, and he said, I got to reboot this team. And he went through all these trades until he finally got James Harden and then Chris Paul. I'm not going to be surprised if the team that we saw in Game 7, not drastically different, but looks pretty different next season.
I could see it as well, especially with everything going on with Ben Simmons when you trade a player like that. Who knows what a guy like him could get in return. So I agree. It could look very, very different. I don't see Tobias Harris getting traded, even though that's chatter that I've seen on Twitter. I don't think that's a real possibility. I think him and Doc work so well together that it really wouldn't make a lot of sense to move on from Tobias Harris after the season he just had. But between what could happen with Ben Simmons, Danny Green's contract just came off the books, Dwight Howard, Furkan Korkmaz, there's a lot of decisions to be made with free agents as well. So he's going to have some cap flexibility, along with potentially moving an all-star, superstar type player, depending on how you view Ben Simmons at this point. So I agree, there could be a very strong possibility that we see 4 to 5, maybe, different pieces heading into next season, which would be remarkable. And like you said, Daryl's never sat on his hands. He's going to be working all offseason. And with how well he revamped the team pretty much in one sole night on draft night, people kind of have to be excited about what he'll be able to do now with a full offseason in his hands.
And also, no offense to Tobias Harris, but he doesn't have Simmons' resume. And his contract doesn't really line up with his resume. Like, yeah, in 2 years from now, Tobias Harris' contract is going to look like chump change. Because when Tatum and Donovan Mitchell get their contracts, that's going to blow away the Tobias Harris contract. We all know that. But for right now, Tobias Harris' contract is kind of untradeable, in my opinion. And whereas Ben Simmons, he's a 3-time All-Star, 2-time first-team All-Defense, 1-time third-team All-NBA. At least he's got a resume to go with the contract. So at the end of the day, whether people like it or not, Simmons is technically the most tradable commodity on the Sixers.
Exactly. That's why I really never understood when these debates came about that people started to talk about Ben Simmons as if him and his contract were almost untradeable, which was never the case. You just listed his entire resume, not to mention he's top 15 all time in triple doubles. He's 24. He's under contract for 4 years. Teams are going to want Ben Simmons. Brian Windhorst said on ESPN earlier this week that if the Sixers put him on the market right now, Daryl Morey would get more than a dozen offers on the spot. So Ben Simmons still has value. They can still get a nice return for Ben Simmons. And when looking at it all, I think when you look at this Sixers roster, first of all, we talked about it all season. Tobias Harris is the perfect kind of third guy on a very good team. And Joel Embiid has shown that he can be the top guy on a title team with the way he played this year. And I think why Ben Simmons is the most tradable one is because it's clear the Sixers need that number two guy. You have your top guy, you have your third guy. Now you need that kind of co-star in the middle of them that is a little bit better than all-star level and can still play on a close to similar level of your top guy. So I agree. If you're looking at the entire big three, you don't trade Tobias Harris. Obviously, if someone has to go at this point, it's going to be Simmons.
Also, I just want to remind people that Ben Simmons' AAV is at $35 million. There's a lot of dudes who are way ahead of him in AAV. And on that list, by the way, is Rudy Gobert, who also has no offense. Klay Thompson, who is coming off multiple injuries now. Tobias Harris, his AAV is higher. And by the way, someone we saw last night is Chris Middleton, who's struggling in this series, but his team won last night. And Simmons has the same AAV, you ready for this, as Kemba Walker, Jimmy Butler, and Paul George. So he's kind of almost like that next tier down when it comes to money. So trading him is not, to me, going to be the biggest problem. The question everybody asks is, what do you get in return for him? And that's going to be the big question. Now, I'm not saying they can't get a return for him, but I like what Bobby Marks told Mike Gill earlier this week on Sports Bash. He said, you're not getting Dame Lillard. You're not getting Bradley Beal. You got to bring your expectations down. But, Kevin, you know what I remember? I remember Daryl Morey trading for Chris Paul. He traded about 200 players for him, and guess what? The Clippers went to the playoffs the next year with that ragtag group that got traded for Chris Paul. So, as far as I'm concerned, if Morey gets a bunch of really good supporting cast players and maybe brings in one of the players, like let's say he brings Kyle Lowry back home, just throwing out an example. So what if your starting lineup next year is Lowry, Seth Curry, Danny Green, Tobias Harris, Joel Embiid, and you got this huge, massive bench to go along with it. Don't forget, you have, let's say Tyrese Maxey's still here. That's still a pretty damn good team.
I agree. I feel like they could do a little better, maybe.
Okay, sure.
Although Ben Simmons' stock may have gone down, I think that's still more than capable of getting a nice return for a player like him. I don't hate the idea of CJ McCollum. I think he fits a lot of what they need. Obviously, after how that playoff run went down, obviously, I feel like it potentially could be a lateral move with how much you're giving up defensively with Ben Simmons, but I think you make a real valid point. Obviously, the bench was a very weak point all throughout the season and reared its ugly head even more in the playoffs. So if you could get, 3 to 4 playable guys and really fill out your rotation that way, I could see it, being a realistic thing that Daryl might do.
Do you think the idea of Lowry coming to the Sixers is viable? Is it legitimate? Or do you feel that's a pipe dream?
I feel like it's just a pipe dream. I don't know if the Sixers really have the cap room to pull a move like that where other teams could offer him a little more money. So unless he's coming on an extremely team-friendly deal, like he really wants to finish his career in Philadelphia and he's willing to do whatever he needs to make that happen. If I had to gauge it on a scale of 1 to 10 on probability, I'm probably 4 to 5 at the most of it being realistic.
Okay. All right. So then the next question is, I'll ask you, is Danny Green back here next year?
I would love Danny Green to come back next year. I think he was the unsung hero in the starting lineup all year. He said in his exit interview that Doc Rivers told him he wasn't going anywhere and that'll see him again next year. So obviously I think he's well liked. The price point is going to be an interesting thing. Obviously I don't think the Sixers are going to pay him $15 million a year again after, getting up there in years and being on the latter half of his career. But with what he's done as a mentor and a vocal leader, both on and off the floor with this team, I think it's very tough to just let a guy like that walk.
Is there a guy who is going to be a free agent that stands out to you as being maybe not like a big name, but maybe a valuable piece for this team? Like we know Montrezl Harrell can be a free agent. We know some of the names that are out there. They're not huge names, but there's some interesting names who are going to be free agents.
I haven't really dove into it that far. Basically, I'm more just looking at like archetypes of players that the Sixers need, and one of them is a point guard. Whether they trade Ben Simmons or they don't, the Sixers need a point guard. If Ben Simmons is going to stay, the point guard experiment needs to end. The Sixers need somebody outside of him in that starting lineup who can run an offense, who can create on the outside. I mean, Reggie Jackson's about to be a free agent, although the Clippers are probably going to try everything in their power to retain him. I think he would be a nice name, but a shot-creating point guard who can help run an offense. Mike Conley's another interesting name. He was somebody I wanted to trade. I wanted the Sixers to trade Al Horford for something I wrote about for 97.3. I thought he would be an interesting name. So if, point guard is the position I want the Sixers to attack, I feel like it's their biggest area of need. How they go about doing that, whether it's a home run like Lowry or they play the margins, is truly on Daryl's hands. But whether it's trading Ben Simmons or not trading Ben Simmons, point guard is what they need.
Is there any idea of what you think the Sixers could also maybe do in terms of the bench depth when it comes to complementing some of the young players they already have? For example, Maxey, Thibault. Because to me, I wouldn't be surprised if they had to include Thibault in a trade if they trade Ben Simmons, but I'm dead set on them keeping Maxey. To me, I think Maxey can be a better version of De'Aaron Fox, in my opinion.
That is a hot take right there.
You like that?
Tyrese, I did not see that one coming at all. It's so tough with young guys because look at the Miami situation. They're kind of in that same boat that the Sixers were of. They refused to include Tyler Hero because, they said he was going to be the next Devin Booker and this, that, and the third. And then he flopped hard in his second season. And now I saw something on Twitter yesterday that apparently he's on the table now in trade talk. So Tyrese Maxey being that untradeable asset I think he's right up against the wall. I don't know if I'd want to part ways with him just because I think he's the most exciting Sixer that fans should be looking forward to heading into training camp just because of how much of a gym rat he is. And now he has a full off season with an NBA trainers and coaching staff. He could look like a completely different player heading into training camp. We know players typically take their biggest jump between years 1 and 2. So this is it for Maxey when he makes his arguably biggest jump of his career. So he'd be a very tough goodbye. I don't know if you trade Matisse if you move on from Ben because you're still going to need that elite level defender, and he's shown that he can be that if you give him, larger minutes. So it's going to be tough in terms of complimenting. I think just more shooting and more ball handling. That's really been the key for the Sixers. When you're looking at all these other playoff teams, whether it's in their starting lineup or off the bench, they have guys who can make shots. They have guys who can put the ball on the floor, and they have guys who can make the decisions when it comes to them. So it's literally just good, solid role players who understand what they're doing, whether it's keeping a guy like George Hill, what they decide to do, who knows, but just viable guys, obviously shooters, because you need in today's game, you can't have enough shooting. So obviously that's objective number one, but ball handling, creation, and just decision makers, that's what they need.
Kevin McCormick at Kevin MCC NBA on Twitter. Follow him for all your Sixers and NBA coverage. Joining us here on Sports Bash Saturday on 97.3 ESPN. Kevin, before I let you go, fill in the blank. Who wins the NBA championship this year?
I'm going to go Phoenix.
Okay.
I feel like they're the most fun pick. The Clippers were originally my pick, but every time I watch Phoenix, I feel like I just fall more in love with them. I think they're just a great story all around. So if I had to pick right now, I think I'm going to go Phoenix-Milwaukee finals with Phoenix winning.
I have to agree with you on that. We may not agree on the Ben Simmons stuff, but I will agree with you on that. Partially also is because of the fact that Kawhi is injured. I mean, if Kawhi was healthy, I would go with the Clippers over the Bucks. But
I agree.
I just feel like the Bucks are going to find a way to win this series in 6-7 games. And I think that the Suns, I just think that the Clippers have no answer for DeAndre Ayton. And I don't think Devin Booker's going to shoot horribly the rest of the series. So, it's just not going to happen. Although I'm really getting tired of these Devin Booker, Kobe analogies people are making. It's so bad. It's so poor. I mean, what is up with the world and constantly having to make an analogy? He's the next Kobe. How about him being the best Devin Booker that he is? How about that?
It's just the league and the marketing of their stars. They're trying to pave this next generation. These playoffs have been a great example for it, with Donovan Mitchell, with Luka Doncic, Trae Young, Devin Booker now in the conference finals. There's so many young guys now who fans typically aren't accustomed to seeing in the playoffs. And while they may look at it as a downside of not having the LeBrons, the Steph Currys and such, now you have this nice, fresh young batch of who are going to be the next superstars when the Steph Currys and the LeBron Jameses retire. So, that's how it is. Obviously, no one can ever be satisfied. We have to compare now to everything back in the day, and that's just going to be a fact until the end of time.
Yeah, I'm still going to gripe about it. Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN. Kevin McCormick joined me here on Sports Bash Saturday. Kevin, appreciate the time and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
No problem, Josh. You as well.